An underground Nazi village. There were spa facilities, kitchens, and in here is one of the dormitories. And you can see up here on the wall one of the German army eagles, and there was once a swastika under here. It was scratched off by Dutch teenagers after the war in an effort to delete that history. There would have been about 65 soldiers living here during the war, and up here you can see where they've put the directions painted on the wall in black ink. K, the direction to the coast, and PAK, the anti-tank guns. You find them down there.
To get in here, they get a feeling about the war. The time capsule is decorated just like the guys have left yesterday.
For 79 years, the world has wondered what secrets lay hidden beneath the earth, deep in the heart of Berlin. Now, after decades of speculation, Hitler's secret bunker has finally been uncovered. What was discovered inside will leave you speechless. From the dark remnants of a twisted regime to eerie personal items, this hidden space reveals chilling truths about one of history's most notorious figures.
On this day in 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in an underground bunker as Soviet troops closed in on Berlin. Soon after his death, Nazi Germany surrendered to Allied forces. This marked the end of the Second World War.
The site, which had been largely untouched since Soviet troops moved in shortly after Hitler's death in 1945, had remained hidden beneath layers of history. The researchers were granted unprecedented access to the bunker, and their findings would raise new questions about the end of the Nazi regime and the true fate of the man who led it. What they discovered inside the bunker, buried beneath the streets of Berlin, was far more than just an empty space frozen in time. It was a testament to the final days of Hitler's life and his collapsing empire.
Soviet troops move into the bunker and they confirm not just the fall of the Third Reich, but the death of Adolf Hitler himself.
A team of French researchers was granted unprecedented access to fragments of his remains, including parts of his jaw and dentures. The researchers confirmed that the teeth were indeed Hitler's, matched precisely against his dental records that had been preserved by his personal dentist.
The team of researchers was allowed to examine fragments of Hitler's remains which had been preserved in Soviet custody for decades. These included parts of his jaw and dentures. The items, long thought to have been lost or destroyed, were finally analyzed in detail. Forensic experts were able to match the remains against Hitler's dental records, which had been carefully preserved by his personal dentist, confirming that the teeth were indeed his. This was not a mere historical curiosity. It was a piece of the puzzle that many had questioned for years. Had Hitler truly died in his bunker, or had he escaped, as some conspiracy theories suggested? The Fora bunker, where Hitler spent his final days, had been designed as a fortress beneath the Reichskanzlei in Berlin. By the time the bunker was completed in 1943, it was one of the most secure structures ever built. As Soviet forces closed in on Berlin in 1945, the situation for Hitler and his inner circle grew increasingly dire. Allied bombers pounded the city from above, and Soviet tanks advanced rapidly from the east. Berlin was on the brink of collapse, and Hitler had already vanished from public view. But where was he? The answer lay underground. Hitler had retreated to a place where he believed he could remain safe, even as the world around him crumbled. The Fora bunker, as it came to be known, was not simply a shelter from bombs and air raids. It was a last-ditch command post, a place from which he could, in theory, still direct his failing forces. Its construction had begun years earlier, but by 1943, the bunker was being expanded to accommodate a growing sense of impending defeat. What had initially started as a modest underground refuge soon evolved into something far more extensive. The first phase of the bunker, called the Vor bunker, had been built in 1936, but it was only a small structure, intended to offer some protection in the event of air raids. By 1943, however, Hitler's demands for a larger, more secure fortress grew. As the reality of Germany's failing war efforts set in, the need for a deeper, stronger bunker became all the more urgent. Hitler demanded a bomb-proof refuge that would withstand the most intense bombardment. Construction of the new bunker required speed, secrecy, and an army of forced laborers. The labor force included Soviet prisoners of war, political prisoners, and others rounded up from nearby concentration camps. The workers who toiled under brutal conditions were pushed beyond their physical limits. Food was scarce, and the workers were subjected to harsh treatment. Many were worked to death under the watchful eyes of Nazi guards. Those who slowed down or collapsed were often beaten or shot. Hitler rarely visited the site during construction, but when he did, his presence was felt. Engineers recall that he was deeply dissatisfied with certain aspects of the design. When he saw a concrete wall that was thinner than specified, he exploded with rage, slamming his fist on the blueprints and threatening to execute the lead engineer if the mistake wasn't corrected. The construction of the bunker was a reflection of Hitler's desire for control, even in the face of defeat. The final design of the Fora bunker went far beyond what anyone could have expected. The structure was buried 8.2 meters below ground, with reinforced concrete walls and ceilings that were over 3.5 meters thick. It was designed to withstand direct aerial bombardment. The bunker contained 18 rooms, all connected by tight corridors, sealed off by steel doors. It had electric generators, water pumps, and reserves of diesel fuel, as well as chemical toilets and air filtration systems in case of a gas attack. The bunker was designed to be self-sufficient, enabling those inside to survive for extended periods, even if the city above them had fallen into chaos. Within the Fora bunker, Hitler's personal quarters were modest, but functional. There was a study, a private laboratory, and an emergency exit. The walls were lined with thick plaster to reduce echo, and the space was devoid of windows and natural light. It was a cold, sealed environment, designed for survival rather than comfort. As the war in Europe came to an end, the Fora bunker became the nerve center of a dying empire. In January 1945, Hitler moved into the bunker full-time. By that point, the city of Berlin was under constant siege, and the Nazi regime was rapidly falling apart. Inside the bunker, Hitler was surrounded by a shrinking circle of loyalists, including Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, several SS guards, and a small group of secretaries and aides. Despite the devastation around him, Hitler refused to acknowledge the reality of the situation. He continued to issue delusional orders to divisions that no longer existed, and screamed at his generals, who were also well aware of the collapse. As the Soviets closed in on Berlin, Hitler's mental state deteriorated further. He spent his final days in the bunker, dictating his last will and testament, and even marrying Eva Braun in a midnight ceremony. On April 30, 1945, just days before Soviet troops reached the heart of Berlin, Hitler and Braun took their own lives. Their bodies were only partially burned by their staff before Soviet forces arrived at the bunker. What the Soviets found was a scene of chaos. The bunker was littered with personal belongings, bloodstains, and the eerie silence of death. Following the discovery of the bodies, the Soviets attempted to destroy the bunker with explosives in 1947. However, much of the structure remained intact. The East German government later built apartments over the site, concealing the entrance and removing all public references to its location. For decades, the bunker was forgotten by most of the world. Its true significance remained hidden beneath the rubble, out of sight and out of mind. But in 2024, a team of modern researchers was finally granted access to what remained of the Fora bunker. What they found inside would go on to challenge many of the long-standing assumptions about Hitler's final days and the secrets buried beneath Berlin. Their discovery would raise new questions, and for some, the answers would be even more unsettling than expected. The bunker, long thought to be a forgotten chapter in history, had more to reveal than anyone could have imagined. What lay beneath the streets of Berlin was not just a place where history ended, it was a place where history had been deliberately sealed away, and where the truth of what had happened was hidden in the shadows for decades. As the war in Europe began to near its end, Berlin was under constant bombardment. The once proud capital of Nazi Germany was rapidly being consumed by the chaos of war, and Adolf Hitler, the leader who had driven the country into this abyss, retreated into the underground bunker that had been designed to be the last refuge for the Nazi regime. The Fora bunker, built beneath the Reich Chancellery, had evolved from a modest underground shelter into a vast and impenetrable fortress. It was a space meant to endure the unthinkable, air raids, bombings, and even the collapse of the empire itself. The construction of the bunker had begun years earlier, as Hitler's paranoia about the safety of Berlin and his regime's future began to grow. The initial phase of the bunker, known as the Vor bunker, was completed in 1936. It was a basic refuge designed to protect the leadership from aerial bombardments, which were becoming more frequent as the war dragged on. However, as the tide of war began to turn against Germany, Hitler's demands grew. The Vor bunker was no longer enough. It was clear that the Third Reich was on the brink of defeat, and Hitler insisted on creating a stronger, deeper, and more secure facility. In 1943, the second phase of construction began, resulting in the creation of the Führer bunker, a highly fortified underground complex, designed to withstand the worst the world could throw at it. The construction of the Führer bunker was shrouded in secrecy. Hitler was determined that the structure must be strong enough to survive not only the bombardments that were increasingly decimating Berlin, but also any potential gas attacks or chemical warfare. The bunker was designed to be self-sufficient, with everything necessary to allow its occupants to survive for extended periods without leaving its confines. Electric generators, water pumps, chemical toilets, and air filtration systems were all built into the bunker to ensure that those inside could remain isolated from the outside world. The walls and ceilings were constructed using massive amounts of concrete, reinforced to ensure the bunker's durability. The structure was buried deep beneath the ground, 8.2 meters to be exact, and the concrete walls were up to 3.5 meters thick. This was no ordinary underground shelter. It was a fortress that was supposed to endure long after the fall of Berlin. One of the most notable aspects of the bunker's construction was the use of forced labor. Soviet prisoners of war, political prisoners, and other captives from nearby concentration camps were forced to work on the bunker's construction under brutal conditions. Many were worked to death, their lives reduced to mere numbers in a desperate attempt to finish the bunker on time. Food was scarce, and punishments for perceived slowness or failure were harsh. Workers who collapsed from exhaustion were often beaten, and those who fell behind were sometimes executed. The construction of the Führer bunker was in many ways a testament to Hitler's obsession with control. He demanded perfection and would not tolerate any errors, even minor ones. When one engineer dared to present a plan for the bunker with a concrete wall that was slightly thinner than specified, Hitler exploded in a fit of rage. He slammed his fist on the blueprint and threatened to execute the engineer if the mistake was not immediately corrected. This kind of reaction was typical of the man who would demand his vision be realized at any cost, no matter how much suffering it required. By 1945, as the war continued to unfold disastrously for Germany, the Führer bunker had become the final nerve center of the Nazi regime. Hitler moved in permanently in January 1945, as Soviet forces drew closer to Berlin. The atmosphere inside the bunker was one of increasing isolation, madness, and delusion. Hitler's inner circle, a group of loyalists, including Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, and a handful of staff and military personnel, remained with him. The bunker was filled with the sounds of frantic planning and desperate orders, though the situation above ground was rapidly deteriorating. Hitler continued to issue orders to divisions that no longer existed, demanding that his generals continue to fight despite the inevitable collapse of the Third Reich. In the final weeks of April 1945, with the Soviet army just days away from entering Berlin, Hitler issued his last will and testament. He married Eva Braun in a small ceremony in the bunker, a brief and somber affair. The marriage, like everything else in the final days of the Nazi regime, was a final act of defiance, a last attempt to maintain some semblance of control and order. The war was lost, but Hitler would go down on his own terms, surrounded by those few who remained loyal to him. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Braun took their own lives in the bunker. Hitler consumed a cyanide capsule and shot himself, while Eva Braun swallowed cyanide. Their bodies were partially burned by their staff in a desperate attempt to prevent them from being captured by the advancing Soviet forces. When Soviet soldiers entered the bunker shortly thereafter, they found only remnants of a collapsed empire. The bunker was littered with scattered personal belongings, bloodstains, and the haunting silence of a regime that had finally met its end. Soviet forces attempted to destroy the bunker in 1947, using explosives to collapse much of the structure, but large parts of it remained intact. The Soviet Union sought to erase all traces of the bunker, covering the entrance and removing any public references to its location. For decades, the site was largely forgotten by the outside world, buried beneath a sea of rubble and time. However, the story of the Fura bunker did not end there. In 2024, a team of modern-day researchers was granted permission to enter the bunker and explore what remained of it. What they found inside was not just a forgotten relic of the past, but a dark and chilling reminder of the final days of Nazi Germany. As they descended into the bunker, they were not prepared for the horrors they would uncover. The air inside was toxic, and still, the walls coated in mold, the floors covered with pools of stagnant water. The temperature was unnaturally cold, and the structure was unstable, with parts of the ceiling collapsed and sections of the bunker completely impassable. Despite these dangers, the team pressed on, determined to uncover the truth of what had happened in the bunker, and what it could tell them about Hitler's final moments. What they discovered inside was chilling. Some of the rooms were exactly as they had been left in April 1945. A metal-framed cot still stood in one corner of a room, a rusted table, and some old ration tins scattered nearby. The walls had begun to decay, but in places, maps of Berlin and post-war Europe could still be discerned. The rooms were preserved in a state of eerie stillness, as if frozen in time. In Hitler's personal quarters, the team found a darkened wool blanket on the cot, stained with what appeared to be blood. Despite the physical decay around them, the emotional weight of the discovery was overwhelming. For the first time in decades, the world was given a glimpse into the space where Hitler had made his final stand. As the team continued their investigation, it became clear that the Fura bunker was not just a military shelter, but a psychological space that reflected the mind of a man consumed by delusion and obsession. The meticulous organization of every room, the exact placement of objects, and the obsessive attention to detail spoke to a mind that refused to accept the reality of the situation. Even as the walls of the Third Reich crumbled, Hitler was still clinging to control over every small detail of his environment. The Fura bunker was in the end more than just a shelter for a leader in his final moments. It was a symbol of the desperate and delusional final hours of a regime that had once ruled with overwhelming force, but was now reduced to madness and chaos. Inside those walls, Hitler tried to maintain his grip on power, long after it was clear that the war was lost. The bunker, with all its cold and personal features, served as a final monument to a leader who believed that the world could bend to his will until the very end. What the researchers discovered inside the bunker in 2024 only added to the layers of mystery surrounding Hitler's last days and the final collapse of Nazi Germany. As Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, the secrecy surrounding Adolf Hitler's underground bunker grew even more intense. The bunker, buried deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, was meant to be an impenetrable stronghold, but it had become a symbol of the collapse of the Third Reich. Once Hitler's last refuge, it was now the final place where the echoes of his rule would remain, hidden from public view for decades. In the aftermath of the war, the Soviet Union took control of the bunker, but instead of sharing the full extent of what they had discovered, they chose to conceal it. The reason for this secrecy would not become clear until many years later, but the cover-up around the bunker would shape the historical narrative of Hitler's death for decades to come. In May 1945, as Soviet forces reached Berlin, they took full control of the bunker site. While officially they were securing the area, the reality was that they were also trying to erase all traces of Hitler's final moments. Soviet teams descended into the bunker, photographing the bloodstains on the floor, collecting bone fragments, and gathering documents. The findings were then whisked away to Soviet archives, where they remained largely hidden from the public. Why did the Soviet Union choose not to reveal what they had found? Why were so many of the documents and artifacts from the bunker kept secret? According to Soviet records, Hitler's remains were recovered and examined, then burned again to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Allies. However, the records were inconsistent, delayed, and in some cases, deliberately misleading. Stalin himself, despite receiving strong evidence from Soviet investigators that Hitler had died in the bunker, refused to confirm his death to the world. Instead, rumors spread that Hitler had escaped, and Soviet media began pushing stories that he might have fled to Spain, Argentina, or even Japan. These claims were not made in secret. Stalin shared them directly with US President Harry Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. But why would Stalin suggest that Hitler had escaped when the evidence pointed to his death? The Soviet refusal to confirm Hitler's death planted the seeds for the conspiracy theories that would flourish in the years to come. Despite the findings from Soviet investigators and the partial remains recovered from the bunker, the story of Hitler's death was far from settled. The conspiracy theories suggested that Hitler had faked his death, either with the help of a body bubble or by escaping through secret tunnels, which gave rise to a widespread belief that the Nazi dictator had survived the war. These theories were not just based on hearsay, but were fueled by the Soviet silence and the inconsistencies in the information they had provided. By the mid-1940s, with no official confirmation from the Soviets, these conspiracy theories began to gain traction. Reports emerged claiming that Hitler had been seen in various parts of the world, including South America, where he was said to have taken refuge under a new identity. Other reports suggested that he had undergone facial surgery to alter his appearance. These false leads spread rapidly, aided by the lack of concrete evidence and the unwillingness of Soviet officials to release their findings. The Soviet Union's decision to keep silent about Hitler's death allowed these theories to take root and gave them the air of plausibility. In the 1950s, the idea of Hitler's escape was so entrenched that many respected journalists and historians began to question the official narrative. The absence of official forensic records and photographs allowed conspiracy theorists to invent alternative histories. Several individuals who had been near the bunker in 1945 claimed that the body they saw being burned was not Hitler's. They described a man who resembled Hitler but had different physical features. The lack of clear evidence from the Soviets allowed these stories to grow and spread, further cementing the idea that Hitler had survived. The situation remained in limbo for decades. The official story of Hitler's death had been overshadowed by the rumors and conspiracy theories, and the Soviet silence had only deepened the mystery. It wasn't until the 1960s that Soviet officials quietly admitted that they had recovered dental remains believed to be Hitler's. The dental records had been obtained from Hitler's personal dentist, who had kept meticulous records of the Führer's dental work. This admission, though significant, was not accompanied by the release of any photographs or detailed analysis of the remains. The Soviet Union continued to withhold the full scope of its findings, leaving room for the conspiracy theories to continue unchecked. It was not until the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s that more information began to surface. With the collapse of the Soviet state, declassified records and documents slowly became available to independent researchers. In the early 2000s, Western forensic scientists were given access to fragments of Hitler's skull and jaw that had been recovered by Soviet investigators. After conducting thorough analysis, the results confirmed that the remains matched Hitler's known dental records. The evidence was clear: Hitler had died in the bunker on April 30, 1945. Yet by this time, the conspiracy theories had become so ingrained in popular culture that they could not be easily dispelled. The myths surrounding Hitler's death have persisted for decades, fueled by the Soviet cover-up and the lack of concrete evidence released to the public. In the years following the war, the Soviet Union went to great lengths to suppress information about the bunker and its contents. Even as early as 1945, Soviet intelligence officers reportedly removed a number of classified documents, coded communications, and small boxes containing unknown contents. These items were never publicly disclosed, and their absence has only deepened the mystery. What was contained in these boxes? Why were they kept secret? The cover-up surrounding the bunker did not end with the Soviets. In the 1970s and 1980s, East German authorities began an aggressive campaign to erase any physical traces of the bunker. Bulldozers were brought in to destroy the remaining above-ground structures, and the original entrance to the bunker was sealed off. The East German government went so far as to alter state archives and misrecord the location of the bunker. Apartments were built over the site, and the government made sure that no memorials or public references to the bunker existed. The intention was clear: the public was not to know about the bunker's existence, and any reminder of it was to be erased. The East German government claimed that the bunker was a potential site for neo-Nazi gatherings, and that its destruction was necessary to prevent any resurgence of Nazi ideology. However, many questioned this explanation. If the government's sole concern was preventing neo-Nazi activity, why was the location of the bunker kept secret for so long? Why did the Soviets and East Germans suppress all attempts at scholarly research into the site? And why did they go to such great lengths to erase the physical evidence of its existence? In 2024, modern researchers were finally granted permission to enter the Führer bunker, but what they found was not just a decaying relic of history. The bunker had been sealed for decades, its secrets carefully hidden away from the public. The team of experts who entered the bunker had to navigate a space that was structurally unstable and contaminated by toxic air and mold. Despite the dangers, they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth about Hitler's final days. What they found inside the bunker was not only the physical remains of a bygone era, but also a psychological portrait of a man who had clung to power and delusion until the very end. As the research team began their investigation, they discovered evidence of a cover-up that went beyond the physical destruction of the site. The bunker's hidden rooms, sealed from the inside, suggested that parts of the structure had been deliberately overlooked or concealed. German workers who had been involved in the construction of the bunker later told journalists that not all of the rooms had been inspected by Soviet troops in 1945. They spoke of locked steel doors, airtight compartments, and hidden chambers that were never photographed or documented. Why were these areas ignored? Were they overlooked, or were they hidden on purpose? These questions remain unanswered, and the answers that have emerged only add to the intrigue surrounding the bunker's history. The 2024 excavation was the first opportunity for experts to fully examine the bunker and its contents. As they explored the sealed structure, the team was confronted with the remnants of a world that had disappeared. The walls were lined with dark stains, some of which appeared to be blood. Scratches were found on the walls, possibly made by fingernails. The items recovered from the site provided a chilling glimpse into the final days of the Nazi regime, and the eerie silence of the bunker gave the team a sense of unease that was hard to shake. As researchers entered the final phase of their investigation into the Führer bunker, they came face to face with the eerie remnants of the Nazi regime's last days. The structure, once a stronghold of Hitler's delusion and obsession, was now a decaying monument to the downfall of the Third Reich. What the team uncovered in the deepest parts of the bunker would go far beyond mere historical artifacts. It would expose the psychological and emotional landscape of a dictator who, even in the final hours, clung to control, order, and the illusion of power. The descent into the bunker was not for the faint of heart. For decades, the site had been sealed off, its air stagnant and toxic, its corridors twisted by decay and neglect. Even with modern technology at their disposal, the researchers had to take extreme precautions to enter space. After months of careful planning and the installation of ventilators to clear the poisoned air, a robotic crawler was sent in first. Equipped with a 4K camera, thermal sensors and chemical detectors, it captured footage of the bunker's most inaccessible areas. What the crawler revealed sent a wave of cold realization through the team. The bunker was still structurally unstable, and the atmosphere inside was perilous. Despite the clear risks, the team proceeded. The moment they entered, they were met with the overwhelming stench of decay. Mold coated every surface, and the temperature inside was unnaturally low. The passageways were narrow, some so collapsed that they had to crawl through the debris. It was a space that seemed to have frozen in time, its dark corridors and decaying rooms, telling the story of a regime that had crumbled under the weight of its own delusions. But it was not just the physical decay of the bunker that struck the researchers, it was the psychological weight of what had transpired there. The team moved carefully through the rooms, documenting each artifact they found. Some rooms were exactly as they had been left in 1945, frozen in time. Metal-framed cots still sat where they had been abandoned. Rusted utensils and fossilized ration tins lay untouched on tables. The walls once adorned with maps of Berlin now hung in tatters, barely recognizable. But it was one discovery in particular that shook the team to their core. In a corner of Hitler's personal quarters, they found a simple cot with a dark stain near the headrest. Initial tests revealed that the stain was blood, likely the blood of Adolf Hitler himself. It was a chilling sight, a haunting reminder of the dictator's final moments. The cot was untouched, still in place, as if waiting for a man who would never return. As the team continued their investigation, they uncovered further evidence of the bunker's chilling nature. The walls were scarred by years of neglect and decay, but they also bore the marks of something far darker. In several places, scratches were visible, faintly etched into the plaster. Some experts believe these marks were made by fingernails, left behind by those who had been trapped in the bunker in the final days. In one room, a worker's report suggested that they had encountered a chamber that had been sealed from the inside, an area that had never appeared on any of the known blueprints. When they investigated further, they found candle stubs arranged in a circle and a blackened stain on the floor. What had happened here? Has someone performed a ritual, or was this another symbol of the desperation that had gripped the people inside the bunker? Despite the physical decay, there were still signs of the meticulous order that had once governed the lives of those inside. Hitler, even in his final moments, had maintained a tight grip on the details of daily life within the bunker. The ration tins were all perfectly arranged, the furniture placed at specific angles, and the documents filed with eerie precision. The layout of the bunker itself reflected the obsessive control that Hitler had tried to maintain, even as his empire disintegrated around him. It was clear that for all his delusion, Hitler had not let go of his need for control. He had meticulously planned every aspect of the bunker's functioning, and even in the face of inevitable defeat, he had kept a tight hold on his surroundings. The psychological profile that emerged from the artifacts found in the bunker was chilling. Forensic specialists, trauma psychologists, and military historians worked together to reconstruct the mindset of the men who lived and died in that place. What they found was a portrait of obsessive behavior, delusion, and a steady descent into madness. One of the most significant pieces of evidence came from the bloodstains on Hitler's cot. Tests confirmed the presence of cyanide, which matched historical reports that Hitler had ingested cyanide before shooting himself. The traces of barbiturates found nearby supported eyewitness accounts that Eva Braun had taken poison, while Hitler had used a combination of cyanide and a bullet. But it was not just the physical evidence that provided insight into Hitler's final moments. It was also the psychological clues that emerged from the bunker's layout. The maps that had been found, for example, revealed a man who was still obsessed with control, even as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin. One map depicted the city with red arrows marking troop movements, a futile effort to maintain some semblance of order. On the margins of one map, Hitler had written a message, "Nishabur, they will not survive." The meaning of this message remains unclear, but it suggests that Hitler was still fighting battles that had already been lost. His obsession with war strategy, even in the face of certain defeat, was a reflection of his delusional mindset. Further analysis of the documents found in the bunker revealed a disturbing pattern of religious fixation. Some of the notes found by researchers contained references to divine punishment and final purification. These were phrases that echoed Hitler's earlier speeches, but they had now taken on a more fatalistic tone. Hitler, in his final days, appeared to have seen himself as a martyr for his cause, someone who had to fall with his nation. These religious references only deepened the sense of delusion that had taken hold of Hitler, even as the walls of the Third Reich crumbled around him. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from the notes of Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. Goebbels had made the decision to kill his 6 children, not out of fear, but as a twisted form of mercy. In one of his notes, he wrote, "They will never live under Jewish vengeance." This chilling admission revealed the depths of Goebbels' belief in the Nazi ideology, as well as his willingness to carry out one of the most horrifying acts of the war. It was a decision that reflected the madness of the time, a time when those in power were willing to sacrifice everything, including their own children, for a delusional cause. The psychological and emotional landscape of the bunker was as important as the physical remnants found within it. The objects recovered from the site were not just artifacts of a bygone era, they were symbols of a regime that had spiraled into madness. The items in the bunker told the story of a leader who had become consumed by his own delusions, a leader who, even in the final hours of his life, was determined to hold on to power, no matter the cost. The bunker was not just a shelter, it was a final command center, a place where Hitler tried to maintain control over a world that had long since fallen apart. The discovery of these artifacts and documents has led to a renewed examination of the final days of the Third Reich. The psychological portrait that emerges from the bunker is one of a man who was utterly consumed by his own ideology, even to the point of self-destruction. The evidence from the bunker, whether it be the bloodstains on the cot, the meticulously arranged furniture, or the chilling notes written by Hitler and his closest allies, paints a disturbing picture of the mindset of a dictator in his final hours. It is a portrait of obsession, delusion, and an unyielding desire for control in the face of inevitable defeat. The Fora bunker, once a secret stronghold of the Third Reich, now stands as a haunting reminder of the madness that led to the collapse of Nazi Germany. The artifacts recovered from the site tell a story that is as chilling as it is revealing, offering a glimpse into the mind of one of history's most notorious figures. But the story does not end with the discovery of these objects. The psychological impact of the bunker's history continues to reverberate in the present day. As historians and researchers continue to piece together the evidence from the bunker, they are faced with the difficult question of how to confront the darkness of the past. The bunker may be a physical relic of history, but the psychological scars it left behind are far from healed. The question remains, will the world confront the full weight of what was found, or will it continue to look away?